name is Dr. Frederick E. Covington, and I'm a member of the BROTHAS organization. On Thursday, April 29th, 2021, the BROTHAS in Occupational Therapy held its second interactive training session. Our speaker was Dr. Brian Gibbs, Vice President, Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at UMass Memorial Health. He presented on building sustainable diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in occupational therapy. It was both informative and inspiring. Many left the keynote invigorated to move forward in both their careers and personal lives to be an agent for change. We would like to thank Dr. Gibbs for sharing his knowledge, insights, and expertise. We'd like to thank those that participated in the live session. And today, we'd like to share the recording of the event with the public. Thank you. Enjoy the video.
Hold on to that sentiment. Breathe deeply. Open your hearts and minds to think about not only where we have been, but where we have the potential to go as we struggle and deal with this worldwide pandemic. America is also reckoning with its legacies of racism in healthcare, racial violence, and systemic injustice against Black and Brown people. The current national uprising, sparked by the murders and legacy and the deaths of Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Michael Brown, and more recently, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Daunte Wright, Ma'Khia Bryant, and now Andrew Brown. These deaths have exposed the insanely complex intersections of history, politics, and the law, and how race, privilege, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness function in American society. I am honored to join you for this evening's conversation about these issues, and how we as a caring nation of health professionals can chart a vibrant future for Black, Indigenous, people of color in the field of occupational therapy. My presentation outline, I'm just going to do a little stage setting, provide a brief overview of disparities in health and healthcare, historical accounts of racism and bias, particularly in healthcare, in building DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, lessons learned, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. Most importantly, along the way, I hope to change your view and encourage you to do that by changing your vantage point. And a critical dimension in that space is understanding the history. My history is that it takes a village to make the person that I am today. It requires honoring the past by the best that I can do and running the race that they opened up and created a path for me to pursue the things that have been a part of my career. Along the way, they were planting seeds in me and creating the future that brings us together today. Those names represent, perhaps a thumbnail sketch of the many who have been a part of my career. And there have been family along the way, some of whom are present. My son, my wife, my sons, my wife, my father, my mom, my in-laws, my brothers and sisters, family. This is my OT family here. And one in particular, I just have to call him out, is Dr. Ben Atchison, because he as a man reached me while I was a student in the OT program at Eastern Michigan. And he looked at my grades, which were C- or less, and he said, "Brian, you can do better. And come by to see me, and we'll talk about why that isn't showing up." And And as I found the confidence to trust him in sharing what some of those struggles might be, he only saw distractions in what I was saying. But as a laser focused clinician, he also understood potential. And he cultivated that potential with first planting a seed that it can be better and it can be more. And the level of discipline that was required, I had the potential to create. He handed that baton to so many different people along my path, or that baton was handed, and so many people who are listed here. I just have to call Ben out because he just received the Award of Merit, the highest recognition that the field of occupational therapy can bestow upon any therapist for their contributions throughout their career. And I'm so humbled and honored by what he accomplished because I'm a part of that. And I ain't ashamed of it. I am so proud of what Ben has done and what impact he's made on my life. And yet, most importantly, I'm incredibly humbled because of the many individuals who touched my life, who saw my potential, who spoke into me and helped me to elevate my vision for myself and my career. My beginnings were, as I mentioned, at Eastern Michigan. I failed out of the OT program, but I fell forward. After a year of being in the program, I was done in by anatomy and then neuroanatomy and was asked to step down. I retook those courses by the same instructor who failed me. And I went from the F and at the back of the classroom to an A in those subjects to the front of the classroom. And then I, along with colleagues, established the Minority Allied Health Organization. Because what happened to me, as I saw it, wasn't because of my limitations. There were limited resources and limited exposure to the pace that I needed to get up to speed and learn and understand differently than I had been previously introduced to as a college student. But again, there was Ben who saw into and was very intentional about bringing that potential forward. I received the MLK Junior Award for Leadership. I became the Eastern Michigan OT student representative to the Commission on Education, and then became the state representative for the state of Michigan and went to San Antonio, where I was introduced to the Black Occupational Therapy Caucus, and my life has never been the same. If you ever meet Jerry Bentley and Doc Brown and folk who just really lift me, you understand what I'm talking about. I had the opportunity to chair the state of California's Black OT, and then, as was said by Andre, serve in the role of Minority Affairs Program Manager, where at that time it was a position of its kind, and it was an honor to be there. My career progressed, and where I had the opportunity to go to graduate school, I wanted to look beyond just occupational therapy, which my assessment is more downstream. And from public health perspective, it's an opportunity to work upstream. It's not just working at the bedside, but more critically working at the community or the curbside to try to make sure that the patients who would otherwise end up with chronic disease burdens have an opportunity for more optimal opportunities for life and better health. And in that space, that's where health is born. That's where health is cultivated. That's where health is most vital in the community. And for me, there were too many patients to pull out of the water downstream. And it was so important to figure out how to work upstream to prevent them from falling in the first place. And yet, despite a war on poverty, civil rights, revolution, Medicare, Medicaid, the Hill Burton Act, dramatic advances in medical research and technology, the Affordable Care Act, we still have made little progress in reducing the elevated death rates of Blacks relative to whites. Disparities persist on at least 3 levels. Differential access to care. Once you're in the healthcare system, you're not provided equal care. And more importantly, you're not provided the equitable care that is necessary, because equal is not enough. And then there are the social determinants that really wreak havoc. Where you live, your zip code, and what you have the opportunity for in terms of education, housing, food security, and the like. So those disparities that I refer to are the differences in health and healthcare between groups. And oftentimes we compare the health of the Black community to the white population. And we see that the disparities in health and the disparities in healthcare delivered are linked to social, economic, or environmental disadvantages. These disparities occur because of one's race, income, education, employment status, sexual orientation, disability status, gender identity. We have infant mortality rates, we have greater death rates, we have higher morbidity, and we have functional impairment as a result of a chronic disease burden that persists across generations, impacting the ways in which any parent will be able to have an affordable income managing a chronic disease with medication and compromised work experience. And that's passed down from generation to generation. About 20 years ago, Congress asked the Institute of Medicine, which functions as the physician's physician, to assess the degree to which racial and ethnic minorities and non-minorities differed in the types of health or quality of health they receive. Explore the factors that may contribute to disparities and or difference in the ways in which care is provided, and then to recommend policies and practices. This was a huge panel of experts from economics, health law, to physicians on the right side or the left side, red side, blue states. It was a compilation of academics, clinicians, and a lot of policymakers. Their conclusions were that disparities by race and ethnicity, when looking at same diagnosis, same age group, by gender or by race, there was variation when it came to race. 2 people, same disease, the only difference is race. And the ways in which care was delivered to both patients, one white, one Black, there was a huge discrepancy. And when you multiply that by hundreds of thousands, when looking at Medicare, Medicaid data, you see that differential and you begin to say, what is this about? What they concluded was that it wasn't just about what was occurring in the healthcare system. It was what occurs in society at large. Physicians, practitioners, therapists of all different dimensions don't disengage from their identity when they come to work. Those disparities occur in the broader historical and contemporary social and economic inequalities. So in housing, those disparities exist. In education, in employment. It's no different in healthcare because it's comprised of the same people who live in a society that values a dollar more than it values humanity. And so it's going to require all of us across all different sectors, all different racial, ethnic groups, generations to move the needle. And it's the institutional, intellectual, and the critical thinking to drive policy and our personal agency to create the change. To provide a brief historical context, because for me, this didn't happen overnight and it didn't happen just by happenstance. It's ingrained in our society, and we can think about what is the African American's experience when you compare a citizenship status with the health experience from 1619 to 2020, a time span of 402 years. 61%, or 246, or from 1619 to 1865, there was chattel slavery provided as care. Chattel slavery is that which you would give a pig, you would give a chicken, you would give a horse or a mule, whatever is necessary to optimize the role that is expected to be a slave. There was no commitment to the humanity or the humane aspects, but it was disparate, inequitable treatment, and contributing to poor health status and outcomes. Hence was born, based on the works of Michael Bird and Linda Clayton, the slave health deficit. And it created a slave health subsystem, in effect, a two-tier system where Blacks received one type of care and whites received another. There was a pseudo-scientific approach to care for slaves who wanted to run away. Why would slaves want to run away? There's a medical condition that psychiatry would come up with. Or those who would be defiant and they were being whipped. That's an uppity Negro. And so the pseudoscience ruled the day. And that's the healthcare system that we are working within. That legacy still persists, but let me not digress. From 1865 to 1965, or a period of 100 years, or 25% of the Africans' experience since coming to and being enslaved and partially freed now in America. And yet there was virtually no citizenship rights. So the Emancipation Proclamation allowed slaves to be free, but in the absence of healthcare, in the absence of education, in the absence of employment, one might call into question, was this better than slavery or was it worse? And so there was absent or inferior treatment facilities, and segregation persisted, and de facto laws throughout most of the health system that allowed for, when Blacks were given treatment, it was in a separate wing of the hospital. And so there was major segregation. However, in 1965 through 2021, there was Medicare and Medicaid and the opportunity for healthcare systems to provide care to the poor and be compensated. And if they didn't provide that care in an optimal way, they weren't able to bill for those services. So it created an incentive, but it didn't necessarily change the hearts and minds of those who were providing care. And so in 65 and 19 and through 2021, we have most citizenship rights. But in this space, it is only 14% of the Africans' experience since coming to being enslaved and partially freed and freed with rights. 14%, or a total of 56 years, where prior to that, for 346 years, there's a deep, deep, deep hole in America. There's a deep, deep, deep chasm that we have to have an accounting for in order to find the enlightenment, a hope, and the determination, fortitude, and persistence that is required to change the landscape. One other landscape we want to always remember is the history of policing in the African American community. particularly as it impacts Black men. In a museum in Boston, my mentor located this sign. It said, "Caution, colored people of Boston, one and all. You are hereby respectfully cautioned and advised to avoid conversing with the watchmen and police officers of Boston. For since the recent order of the mayor and aldermen, they are empowered to act as kidnappers and slave catchers." Kidnappers and slave catchers. Kidnappers and slave catchers. This is in 1851. The value of Black men in law enforcement. And they have already been actively employed in kidnapping, catching, and keeping slaves. Therefore, if you value your liberty and the welfare of the fugitives among you, shun them in every possible manner, as so many hounds are on the track of the most unfortunate of your race. Keep a sharp lookout for kidnappers and have the top eye open. That is what contributes to the talk that we have received as Black men. And that's what contributes to the talk that we have to give to our young sons. The evidence for racism and modern racism in medicine, we don't have to travel too far. We know very recently that the ways in which COVID touched our nation, those who were on the front line and occupying lower paying jobs were the first exposed and the most extremely vulnerable. And it really looked like it would only attack, this virus would only attack somehow people who had some kind of an inferior gene. And yet that wasn't the case. And we had to become a little bit more sophisticated rather than stigmatized in our thought process. So then we went from those who were exposed to the death rates, and we see in comparison by age, no matter what age cohort, Black folk will die at greater rates despite their age group. The protective factors don't persist. While we see in the same society, in the same age groups, we can look at the blue and we can see that white people persist at a very, very, very low percent across age groups, despite the high rates for Black and brown people. And the same goes for the opposite in terms of who has access to the vaccine and who has received the vaccine based on race. 46% of white in total. And yet, when you think about combining that in comparison, 54% people of color, you would say, that's great. 54% of people of color have received the vaccine in comparison to 46% white. But when we think more granularly and look within the varying communities representing people of color, we see a hesitancy, or we see slow uptake. Maybe due to access, transportation, language, many different things, or just, as I said before, mistrust of the health system. Warranted hesitancy is an important frame that we have to not stigmatize people for being vigilant about not rushing into what seems to be evidence to support what is good for them, because we have a history where we've been told that story And like Tuskegee, we discovered after the fact malpractice. So we have challenges and opportunities. Of all the minority groups, African Americans have the most, many times the largest differences in health risk. What we have an opportunity to do is to have the rigor. We have more therapists, or we have more researchers of color who can qualify what the data are saying differently, who can crunch the numbers more rigorously or just as robustly as any other statistician, and bring a diverse perspective to translate that data in a way that makes it more useful and accessible and actionable. African Americans have more disease, disability, and early death as well. That's a marker from which we say, we can do more and we can do better. We can improve upon this. And it's not great data to know, but it's better to know and have a point of reference from which we can continue to work and move forward, such that the chronic disease burden that is inherited from one generation to another, that cycle is broken. And we can measure not only what is happening, but we can use leverage points to help move the system into a more accountable system that preserves the integrity of health and well-being for all people. Additional challenges, however, to improving African American health is that we do have the generations of racism and poverty. We have a lack of trust in the medical system. We have cultural differences. We have a lack of knowledge. We have an opportunity to build bridges. When we think about how Black people experience their doctors, oftentimes they don't believe that the doctor is telling them the truth, or the doctor doesn't believe that the patient was telling the truth. They refuse to order a test or treatment, according to a Kaiser Family Foundation study. They refuse to order a test or provide the optimal treatment plan, and refuse to prescribe pain medication because they thought this was a pain-seeking patient or medication-seeking patient. In occupational therapy, we have an opportunity to improve upon the numbers. Doesn't look so great when we have almost 80% of our profession that remains white. Nothing has really changed since I don't know, I'm not going to even count and call it out, but my time at the American OT Association. Leslie, be quiet. I know you have the number, but I'm not gonna say it. So we have less than 5%, or just about 5% of Black and African Americans in the field of OT. Slight improvement from back in the day, but not nearly sufficient when we consider the chronic disease burden on communities of color and the quality of life that is compromised because of that chronic disease burden that flows across generations. Similarly, in the certified occupational therapy assistant, we have higher percent of Hispanic and African American, and we want to be able to cultivate that and grow it. But we also want to create the career ladders that allow those certified OT assistants to evolve and establish either visibility within and across our profession, or at the local level, become powerful agents of change within their communities, to be able to leverage that education and the prowess or propensity to serve the communities, and it counts for something that is not just another extra role for them to play. When we think about gender, occupational therapy is getting to be about 50-50. That's pretty impressive. I wouldn't have believed it unless I looked at the data. But when we think about faculty, we have very significant challenges. Again, 5% of African American faculty, 6.5% Hispanic, and less than 1% Native American, Alaskan, American Indian, Alaska Native. There are communities that need our services. And there is no reason why occupational therapists as a profession cannot look out and grow our own diverse workforce. There's just no reason why that can't happen unless it doesn't matter. And for those on the call, on the Zoom, I know it matters. And we have to inspire our colleagues, particularly those who serve in higher leadership roles, inspire them to do more and take the lead to do better. And when being asked to talk about what I was, being asked to talk about, recommendations for diverse and inclusive environments and building diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'll pivot a little bit and just really speak to what my experience has been in academia. That you have to begin with a mission, vision, values, core goals as an institution. You have to know where you are, what it's going to take to help get you to where you want to go, and the reasons why. And that diversity, equity, and inclusion is tied to your mission. That it involves recruitment, retention, and promotion of diverse talent, collaborations and partnerships. It's not a diversity officer, it's not a diversity office. It's really about aligning and leveraging the resources across all departments and divisions or institutional entities. It requires a level of cultural competence as well as cultural humility to admit that you don't know what you don't know when it comes to interfacing with other cultures. An understanding about what representation is, it's not just about having faces, it's about something very deeper. It's about understanding connectivity. It's about having the opportunity to not just connect in the mind, but also connect in the heart. And being very vigilant about collecting data, reporting, and monitoring, and sometimes using that to bring change, because these numbers in terms of percent within any kind of graduate program, it hasn't changed over 10 years. Some people, when they see that data, it will move them to want to do more and figure out who they need to work along with to sort of create that change. And then the sort of social marketing. What helps to define DEI excellence. Sometimes it's just local. It's what's happening at your particular institution. And in some of the institutions that I've been a part of, I've been able to help encourage, thinking outside of the box, where we have traditional pipeline programs where we have 15 or 10, students in a year. We have, career day. What I was able to do is just really open things up and bring 1,000 kids from East Baltimore or 1,000 kids from throughout the state of New Mexico for a whole weekend of science, technology, engineering, arts, and math exposure, and have all the different entities across an academic university, from the English department to education to arts and science to all the different healthcare programs, the hospital, all different ways to bring vibrancy to all that is offered in the educational opportunities and to introduce those things to fifth graders through two-year college students. That was the work, and creating that level of excitement across the country, across an institution was particularly noted because it hadn't been done before. But in all the work that we do, it's really important to know who we are and why we're in the midst of doing this work. And it's that item number 8, the implicit association test. If you haven't taken it, aren't familiar with it, I highly recommend that you employ this when you're thinking about what a search committee is going to do in recruiting faculty, what a selection committee is doing when it looks at students, what an admissions program is going to look at when reviewing applications. If the individuals who are doing the assessment or judging of students or faculty, if they haven't taken the implicit association test, then bias is always an inevitable disruptor. I'll skip this slide because it sort of is reinforced in the previous two slides, but there's a program out of University of Michigan, and it does exist at several other academic institutions, called STRIDE, Strategies and Tactics for Recruiting to Improve Diversity Excellence. And many other components here speak to why it's important to have student affinity or resource groups, important to diversify faculty, important to not just diversify faculty, but promote faculty mentoring. That career advancement and promotion is not just for faculty, but it's also for students, and giving students a vision for what they have the potential to do as prospective faculty in our classroom as students. Novel idea, but that's what happened to me. Culture change involves leadership, respect for all, climate, community engagement, and service. And I just want to give a shout out to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and University of New Mexico for, really having a willingness to expand the footprint to do more and do better in the space of recruiting, in the space of doing outreach, in the space of really introducing children from as early as 5 years old to the second year of college, the field. And for OT, if we're at the graduate level entry, then we have to really do a lot of work to reach out into the undergraduate populations. But most importantly, as I said earlier, there is no excuse for any OT program, no matter where it is embedded in a community, region, or state, to not have a vision for growing your own workforce, not being in the space of the elitism, and to assume that that's going to diversify your faculty. The elitism basically is who shows up and who is worthy. If the criteria are not met, if the bar that is necessary is too high and for those who need to reach don't reach, then it's just circumstantial. And we did our part. No, we didn't do our part. We are in need of cultivating a long-term view. And that long-term view one day will become exponential. And we're not just talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're experiencing it. And so to get there, we just have to continue to think outside of the box. Just oppositional thinking and questioning. Why do we have to rely on criteria that keeps the status quo? Why not take into consideration the distance traveled, how an individual's character will somehow define how they show up, not just the test scores, but how they will show up as a compassionate, thoughtful, engaged clinician. Exercising critical consciousness to say, we can't keep doing things the same way, expecting things to change. Working outside the traditional health system boundaries, disseminating critical information, using protests and social embarrassment to really move us forward. We don't have to look very far. And it's not in our rearview mirror. It's right in front of us. It's a generation that's activated to stand up and speak up and raise the level of awareness. And it's up to those who are in positions of influence to take the lead from those young people who are excited, who are invigorated, who are willing to say, Black lives matter. And then we have to be intentional about where they matter the most. And they matter the most in our classrooms. They matter the most in the ways in which we provide care, whether it be to infants or to elders. If we don't have a diversified profession, then we are baked in bias as a profession. And I proudly say that with strong conviction and yet as an indictment to encourage us to do more and to do better in this space than just occupy it and occupy it to maintain status quo. We do more, and the urgency is upon us. Lives are being lost unnecessarily every day. I leave you with the resources that have helped to shape my thought process and activism in the space, critical inquiry, the necessary curiosity to read from cover to cover and to embed myself and to inspire others to embed themselves to think about the lever is in our hands and the change that we desire to see is in our hands. And with that, I say thank you for your attention, your time, the preciousness of your curiosity, and the agency that will be inspired as a result of listening to my words.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gibbs, for that powerful keynote. And just to the audience, ladies and gentlemen, as an occupational therapist, as a professor, as a father, as a Black man, I feel like I've been enlightened. I feel like I've been informed. And with Dr. Gibbs' words, I'd like to think that my mindset has been altered to more encompass my own responsibility in the fight for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I hope, like me, you all take away from this that equal is not enough. Equity is the key. And also, like many of you, as Dr. Gibbs was speaking, I'm sure many questions came to mind. And actually, I'm gonna start off by sharing some questions that the brothers had. And I would like to open up the chat box for you all to post your questions there as well. However, I will start off with the questions. So Dr. Gibbs, now from your experience.
Yes, Dr. Covington.
Yes, sir. From your experience and in your opinion, what is the most challenging aspect of people working in a diverse environment?
The most important is going down to think more open-mindedly, opposed to the mental shortcuts that we are so accustomed to taking in order to see the person who is speaking, in order to listen to the person who is speaking, and in order to hear. Because our minds are moving so fast, compartmentalizing information at such a rapid pace. And we become so proficient at thinking that we can listen, hear, and respect the person in front of us and value who they are just by treating them equal. And we're dismissing a lot of key information if we were able to just slow down. I believe we all have the ability to do that. But sometimes for some, it's anxiety producing because it means we have to slow down, listen, and hear in a way that may challenge the way I think about the world. Will challenge my paradigm, and I will be frozen. Because if you take away the way I view other people, and I think I treat other people fairly, but I, in reality, realize that equal is not enough, where the heck do I go from there? And so I just think our human flaw is our greatest challenge. And that is the ways in which we are filtering information, assuming that our good intentions are good enough. And oftentimes we miss the lesson over and over and over again. And it benefits some and it disadvantages others. And sometimes we don't realize how much of a responsibility we have for contributing to disparity.
Thank you. Another question that arose is, what's your advice to those that we work with, staff, students, or even our colleagues, to understand the perspectives of those with various backgrounds?
So, Dr. Covington, I think one of the most important things that I can say is there's no one pat answer to the question that you pose. And so I would start off with the premise: what is it that I want to accomplish when I'm listening to this conversation? Do I want to engage and be confrontational? Or do I want to keep the temperature low so that there is a way to stay engaged in the conversation? Because once the temperature goes up, communication is broken off. And there's very little opportunity for understanding when that happens. And so wanting to know, what is it that I want to get out of this? And so that positive inquiry, that necessary curiosity to just listen and potentially learn a different point of view, while at the same time managing to overcome a potential conflict when what you are listening to seems like heresy and so inconsistent with your worldview. But your worldview is your worldview. And it's just as biased and skewed as the person you're communicating with. And if you at least give the benefit of the doubt that that person has something to say, and I need to be open to and value what it is that they are trying to convey, not judge them, then we have a chance. We have some opportunity to learn just a little bit more and connect a little bit deeper and stay engaged for a little bit longer, potentially.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you again for that. And not to hog your time with me asking all the questions, I have one more question, then I'll open up the floor. Now, many people have dealt with situations where a colleague was being culturally insensitive, sexist, racist, or even homophobic. What would you recommend in handling that potential situation with that individual?
Well, I would like to believe that there are some policies and practices in play that can hold the individual accountable to. It is not the role of the diversity officer to do much more than execute based upon the policies and practices that are in play. If there's violation, then there's perhaps a lack of accountability. If there is a perpetual violation, then there needs to be some intervention with that individual, but notwithstanding review of policy in the ways in which policies are either ignored or the necessary skill set that is required to ensure that managers and other frontline people who are experiencing this conflict of discrimination are reporting on it, are investigating it, and making determinations that either demean or devalue the person who came forward with the complaint, then we haven't done a good enough job in creating a space of safety that allows for the reporting and the activating of training and the activating of investigation that is fair and equitable and just. And far too often, the individuals who are raising the complaints are victimized and are penalized even more so with retribution. And that's a world that we are currently in, and we also have the opportunity to change.
Again, thank you for that. I know other people participating has questions as well. I know Mr. Delvin Champagne had a question. Delvin, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Gibbs. Thank you for your time and your keynote tonight. Earlier, we had a conversation early on camera. It was in regarding when you was the OT program chair at Florida A&M University, HBCU. My question is in regarding HBCUs. There are currently 6 OT programs at HBCUs, potentially going to be 7 coming soon, from what I understand. What do you recommend currently for HBCUs to promote, faculty diversity and a pipeline for, because as you know, there are some OT programs, because of enrollment and so forth, or, the student enrollment don't reflect the, the historical nature of HBCUs for whatever reason. What is your general thoughts about HBCUs and how they can pipeline faculty and students?
Thanks for your question, Delvin. And I would say I probably have 1 or 2 students who are on this Zoom. And I know in particular, my mentor, Ben Atchison, is also on the call. And Ben saw firsthand up front what was necessary to help our students succeed on the national certification exam. What I believe is necessary is making sure that there is inspiration and hope aside from the academics to help nurture students. Also plant seeds to help them to understand that there is nothing that unique about achieving a Ph.D. that is that far off track from having an undergraduate degree or master's degree in occupational therapy or a master's in any other field. The critical thinking that's necessary, the activism of one's intelligence, and the ways in which one stays committed to the rigor of acquiring the science and the degree is just the same thing that is required in achieving a PhD. More should be there. And it's the role models, it's the opportunity to pour into young people to give them a sense of what the potential beyond the classroom experience as a student can be. So that's vital, and it can be provided by any faculty member. The other side of that experience is making sure that faculty of color aren't burdened disproportionately, that there is a way to spread the kind of support for students that white colleagues will bring to an HBCU culture. And it's important that they are culturally competent and that the program invests in cultivating the vitality of the faculty to not just, for lack of better ways, drain them from the curriculum delivery, but to also activate them to sustain the vitality of their career. What are their interests? What are their passions? What pathway do they want to choose for promotion? What kind of impact do they want to have? What kind of leadership aspirations might they have? We want to understand that in our recruitment. We want to understand that when we are capitalizing on the assets that they bring, not just draining them because of the task at hand.
Absolutely. So at this time, we want to, it's 8 o'clock. And so we want to just open it up to anyone who want to ask a question. If you want to raise your hand or if you want to just jump in and ask a question. I know Ms. Jerry Bentley's on the call and Mrs. Dr. Penny Collier, and the floor is open for the attendees to ask any question you would like. Just jump in and ask a question.
Very intimidating audience, to say the least.
We do have a hand up, Leslie Jackson, and in fact, I like that. We can put your hands up so we can have an order to ask you. So Leslie, it's time. You can go ahead.
Thank you. So Brian, kind of along that last comment you were making, I remember a conversation you and I had way back in the day. some time ago and we talked about the fact that African-American therapists often have the S on the chest. Do you remember that dialogue?
Yes.
And that we often feel that we are in this position that we are the ones responsible for everything. And whether we're in a faculty position or a clinical position, or we are the student, we are often put in the position or expected to fix it for everybody else. And I'm wondering if you had some thoughts on how we, twofold, how we can help our colleagues understand that the responsibility and the onus does not rest with the person of color per se. And at the same time, particularly with our students, how do we help our students of color learn how to advocate for themselves in a very professional way, if you understand my question?
Sure. I think there's a distance between the faculty experience and the student experience. And in between, there is a support group. There are the affinity groups. There is an opportunity for faculty who are white to sponsor and be a part of an affinity group that really focuses on African American students or Hispanic students. There are ways that the local state can have some kind of influence in terms of other therapists outside of the state or outside of the program to serve as role models and supports for both faculty and students. And any faculty member, Black, white, Hispanic, can be a liaison or an ambassador to make sure that kind of connectivity exists. There are all different levels of health professionals that can help mentor and engage in that process so that it doesn't overtax a minority faculty member within the Department of Occupational Therapy. The students won't know that this broad menu of others would be available. They see the one or they see the two, and they don't have time to travel and make connections and everything else. But that's also part of their process for professional growth and development. And it's important that if you want to have diverse faculty, if you really want to have a diverse student body, then you have to cultivate the kind of support mechanisms that will surround them. And that's the village, as I said at my opening slide. And my village was robust and vital to my career trajectory. And I had Ben and I had Sherry Sells Folks, and Sherry is no longer with us. But they planted seeds in me so that I would be a person who would help gather students, organize students across multiple professions, and impact things in such a way that it just created something that could be sustained. Because as students, we're going through this together, and we can help each other, and we can create, importantly, connections to the K through 12 populations as well. And I think that cultivates the kind of inspiration and keeps us kind of enthusiastic about the doldrums of going through the program.
Elizabeth Cheng, you had your hand up next.
Hello, thank you so much. Dr. Gibbs, thank you so much for a wonderful keynote. I just want to acknowledge my privilege as an Asian American, but I also consider myself a person of color. And as we know in our greater society, there's a lot of anti-Asian hate right now. So I feel the importance of bringing all of the Black, Indigenous people of color together in solidarity at this moment in time. And again, as a Asian American, I don't feel the systemic racism I feel like a lot of my African American brothers and sisters have, but I just wanted to state that. So I'm here in solidarity. My question to you, Dr. Gibbs, is you've worked at many prestigious universities. Do you think our national organization, AOTA, should be doing more in terms of systemically doing more than strongly encouraging our colleagues to be culturally responsive? The reason I asked this is because I've talked with a colleague, African American, and she said she almost feels like we need to have a stick because the carrot is not working in terms of people being really culturally responsive. And I'm also blessed to be a professor. And I've seen all this research that just like Professor Jackson said, a lot of people that identify as BIPOC professors, our lifespan is shorter because oftentimes we do have to try and fix everything. And anyway, because we don't get a chance to do the research that we need to do because we do so much on the community part and the service part, because all of our students are coming up to us because they need mentors. And so again, that's a long way of saying, do we need more at the high levels to really get this going? Because again, I feel like it's kind of seen as extra. And to me, it's not extra. This is part of our work.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Ching, thank you for your advocacy and your thoughtful ways of connecting a lot of the dots that hold us together. And as an ambassador of something more and something better in the collective, it's the vision that you have, it's the one that you're working from, it's the urgency and speaking to what does AOTA need to do more of to foster a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable space to practice, to learn, to teach. And to that end goal, one has to call into question the mission of the association. If it's not in the mission, then it doesn't matter. And so I leave it there because once it's in the mission, then there's a way to get the foundation of others to create not just the level of advocacy that was required to make it part of the mission, but the kind of activism that makes sure that there are measurable steps that are taken beyond having the mission statement. And the measurable steps that are taken are benchmarked. Where are we now as a profession? If this is our mission and goal, over 20 years, almost 30 years, have we really needle? So what is having this as a part of our mission? The culturally competent curriculum, the disparities in health and healthcare, the resources that I presented in terms of books and knowledge about racism in medicine, racism in healthcare, and the ways in which we as a profession and people of color entering the profession are inheriting that history. And either we are going to stay rigidly adherent to everything that is necessary to be the professional and to be recognized as the scholar and to be optimized and glorified as a leader. And we did it all within the framework that was established for white culture. Then we are in a box, and navigating that box will always feel like great pressure, because we're helping so many. As I said, the analogy of public health, we're trying to pull a lot of people out of the river, and we're not going upstream to figure out how to prevent them from falling in the first place. And those are our students. We don't want them to fall into a space that is hostile and unhealthy for learning. They are subjecting their brain, their intellectual power and openness and curiosity to acquire what they believe to be an honest and safe space to learn more. about a profession that cares so much about the being beat up and being dismissed was not a part of what they signed up for. And yet that's what we see. And we're trying to put a Band-Aid on them, but they are not the issue. It's the system that they are coming into that we have to sort of move, upstream to address.
Agreed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Jackson, I think you were next.
Thank you. First off, I want to thank you for gracing us with your presence and all of this knowledge that you're dropping here tonight. I don't know how everybody else feels about it, but I'm throwing gratitude right now. And I want to ask, can you provide guidance on how to navigate professional spaces outside of academia, such as the workplace, to create sustainable change in practice as well as policies related to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
The only, and thank you for that question, Dougline. The only thing that I could say is networking. Simply said, the networking that we have to do to build connections with people who are outside of our profession, the connection with community where there are people of influence and in different ways, that network is also very, very, very important. If we want to expand beyond the clinical and move to the curbside in terms of where we can have great influence, then the due diligence is knowing the people who are at the curbside. And the due diligence is making oneself viable to where they're curious about your perspective. And you've done the sufficient amount of homework to know why they want to know about you. And you're just going to deliver it that way because they need to know who you are. That's what matters. You know that they need to know who you are.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jerry Bentley, you have your hand up next.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Gibbs, for broadening our perspective and hopefully stirring us to action. First of all, I'd like to applaud the brothers for bringing Brian back home. In so doing, you have confirmed that fathers and brothers have more influence than mothers and sisters, and rightfully so. I'd just like to make a couple of comments. I don't have a question. First of all, I'd just like to point out and correct the history. Brian was the inaugural program director for a program that did not exist, the Minority Affairs Program. And that came out of work that was done by the Hispanic Caucus and the Black Occupational Therapy Caucus. And in order to do that, it took a level of maturity, strength, and solidarity to be able to navigate those hostile waters at AOTA in the early 1990s. And that still exists. We have made tremendous strides, but I think in order for things to be different in our profession, our policies, procedures, rules, and regulations have to change. Until people are required to change, they won't change. Because if you look at the history, 1990 was how many years ago? So we've been 30 years in this struggle trying to get change. Until the policies and procedures, the requirement, ACOTE, until the standards change, nothing will change. To the professor that asked, I think it was Dr. Chen, was talking about, how do we do this work? I would suggest that a number of professors have at their fingertips Black practitioners who are willing to help mentor and support your students of color. So I would encourage you to reach out to the caucuses in your particular area. You can reach out to the Black Occupational Therapy Caucus webpage to get support. This struggle continues. It's not work for the faint of heart. And in order to do the work, you have to be committed. And commitment comes and goes, and it's fine. But you know that the struggle exists. And if you're serious about the struggle, it's going to be hard work. But as I said, we're making strides, and I think there will be change before I close my eyes, unless they close very soon. But thank you,
Jerry.
very much.
Thank you. And, just again, to speak to It Takes a Village, because Jerry was a part of the selection committee that was assembled to establish this position, and then to recruit for the program manager. And she spoke for me. And she didn't just speak on my behalf. She stood behind and supported my career. And I would not be here if it weren't for Jerry and a few others who were willing to invest confidently in my making a transition from California to Silver Spring, Maryland, or Rockville, Maryland, rather. And so, Jerry, just know that I carry that deeply and dearly, daily.
All right, we have Dr. Epicona Nweri from LIU, a friend of mine as well. He has his hand up, and after him, we have William Wright. Okay, Dr. Kona?
Thank you, Sean. Good to hear from you. And thank you, Dr. Gibbs, for providing us with such thoughtful words and insightful historical analysis. There are many points that you raise about health disparities that I would love to learn more about, but just to be considerate of others, I'll be brief. Much has been made of the lack of Black OTs in the profession. I think you mentioned the number being at about 5%, a number that hasn't budged in decades. And I agree, the optics do not look good. Representation matters. Similar discussions are had in policing. Does diversifying the police force improve interactions in Black neighborhoods? I think that still remains to be seen. So what are your thoughts then on coalition building in the OT profession to address those inequities in health, perhaps even upstream, that disproportionately affect the clients that we serve?
I think the premise around the Black OT caucus, the Hispanic OT caucus, premise is that coalition matters. And if you think the numbers haven't changed, as Jerry just alluded to, this is hard work. It's hard to at least sustain the numbers. And the kind of activism in the presence of people who would otherwise not want to see, hear, or address the activism, it's hard. And so managing in the presence of that kind of resistance is crucial and cannot be understated. I truly believe in coalition. I truly believe in multi-generational, multicultural, and the ways in which a coalition is built with people having an equitable say and presence and value and meaningful insight that can come from those who have the least resources, but have the biggest heart. And so how we operate in that space to make sure that coalition of others is valued is really important. I agree that the notion of diversity in law enforcement doesn't necessarily translate into change, because unless the culture changes, then the culture will always trump strategy. And it's the same thing as the OT culture that a senior statesperson like Jerry can speak to, or Ben can speak to. Those things that are sacrosanct to make OT as pristine and prominent as it is. It's fighting for its place in the health profession. It's not necessarily fighting for its space in society. It's a whole different kind of metric, calibration, and function. And it's embedded, it's set, it's ingrained, and people are rigidly adherent and will not give up that power to define its mission and purpose without the kind of coalition building that's necessary. So do you think that they want to see the collective agency of others to demand something more and better from itself? No. They don't want to value that opportunity for change. But I think over time, as Jerry said, before her eyes are closed, change is on the horizon. And I'm gonna hold her to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
We have William Wright. William, I know you have a tough time raising your hand, but you can unmute.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Gibbs. The session has been so informative and educational, and I would also start by, I'm not sure if I have a question or a comment, but I acknowledge, my own unearned white privilege as I try to pose this question. I'm a program director for a developing OTD program who's committed to greater diversity throughout our cohorts so that our cohorts reflect the populations that they'll serve. I struggle with a couple of different areas. I appreciated your comment about looking at, I took it as looking at our applicants and the distance that they've traveled rather than just test scores and GRE scores, et cetera. I know in my own small liberal arts college, we don't have great infrastructure and resources to support all of our students at the graduate level. And I think about the amount of money that our applicants are investing to come into the program, and the type of thing that keeps me up at night as a program would be having a student fail out after incurring $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 worth of debt. You also talked a little bit about the system, and I think about specifically ACODE and the requirement that we have to put on our front page of our websites, our graduation rates and our pass rates. And it makes me think about the fact that we're trying to embrace change and give more opportunities, but at the same time, we're held to these high stakes. And it's frustrating to me. And I'm not sure how to deal with that at the same time. So again, I'm not sure if it's a comment or a question, but these are the things that I struggle with because I can't help but think, and I have no data to support this, but I can't help but think that the minoritized populations that are getting accepted into the programs are the low risk. They're coming in with high GPAs, but what about all of the others that deserve the opportunity and the chance that we know could be terrific OTs if given the opportunity? So.
William, thank you. I appreciate your comments and the struggle with trying to elucidate what the question is. And I am almost moved to tears because it's not necessarily the question, but the conscientiousness of your thought, that you would at least go as far as to say it keeps you up at night that the students are failing, certain students are failing. the what about the other students who are not the exceptions, but who are part of the norm. I am moved to a tier or two because that's me. And yes, it was important for me to understand that my failing wasn't because of me. It wasn't because of me, because I knew how hard I worked to fail. And I had something else to do in my life than it be defined by this failure. So it was not going to define me. And it was up to me to figure out, well, what else is there? If it happened to me, it could happen to other students. So it happened to me, but I worked through it. But then my role was to ensure that it didn't happen to the next student and those who came behind me. And it's important for those who are the entitled or those who are the exceptional students not to disconnect from the communities and the pathway that others could travel, and they not see themselves as the unicorn and just bask in that brilliance without purpose. And we can do things to support them in ways that they can see the other dimensions of who they are and where they come from and why it's important to stay connected, not to exploit them, but to ensure that they can teach us, that other students can reach us, and we have so much to capitalize on, even with the unicorn, but not to pump our chests out, count the data point, and see the success and assume our work is done, because that's not the case. And so the critical thinking that keeps you up at night is exactly the movement that you need to be in the midst of to move to a different place where it's not the student who is failing, but it's the institution that's failing the students.
Thank you, Dr. Gibbs. Now here's the thing, it's an announcement. This is, I guess, my public service announcement. The time is 8:30, we were right on time. We have 3 hands up with 3 questions. Now, with your permission, those that have to leave, they can leave. I'm not officially closing this out, but it's up to you, Dr. Gibbs, if you can answer those 3 questions before they go. And for those so that they can get a bit of, pick your brain, get a bit of your knowledge. Do you? It's okay with you?
It's okay with me. I'm
okay.
Deeply honored and humbled to be in this space.
All right, so we have Joel Phillips and Kevin Gray. So Joel first.
Kind of jump in real quick, Joel, real quick. Guys, yes. Before you answer the question, if you go to the chat, you can download your certificate of attendance for your record. Just note that. Okay. Go ahead, Joel. I'm sorry.
Okay. Greatly honored to be here. Dr. Gibbs, I'm not sure if you remember, a better part of a decade ago, I had the privilege of meeting you at a diversity and inclusion symposium at Western Michigan University.
Yeah.
We share a kinship and both, again, a collective benefit of our brother Ben Atchison, who has influenced both of us. So the irony that this is happening in real time, and we share this man who has touched our lives and helped played an influential part to where we are today is just amazing. Since then, a lot has transpired. I have a company that provides occupational therapy services, clinical, administrative, and program development for federally qualified health centers here in Michigan. And one of the things that has been near and dear to me as time has gone on, and we're in this place now, is and again very quickly. One of the things that where I'm at now in my career is sharing this legacy, or creating this legacy, and the recruitment of students of color, and how much of a necessity it is now. So my question to you is, when you began some of the campaigns you did in doing this measure, what are some of the things that you recall doing that were influential in the grassroots of getting this mechanism moving to cultivate and both mobilize students moving forward to do this in some of your endeavors?
So Joe, I want to say congratulations on your career. The ways in which you have leveraged your training and the other dimensions of yourself as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, as a person of influence, where you were bold enough to step into some spaces and generate trust through your ethics and adherence to integrity. That's huge. And I would say right behind that, in response to your question, it's about building trust and understanding what your brand is. If you want to, for all of us, create connectivity to ensure that young people have a path into the profession, they have a safe passage, they understand what the terrain is, and albeit they won't be perfect, but as prepared as they can be, that's the front loading that is unequal. And now we understand how unequal it is, because just think, if we had that front loading, where will we be? Where might we be?
Right.
So for many of us, we didn't inherit it. Our parents didn't know how to pass it along, and we weren't connected in a way that we knew where to go to get it. And so we were learning trial, and we accomplished so much. It's important to stretch back, not just give back, but stretch back, so that we understand that kindergarten, that fifth grader, has the same kind of academic prowess and potential that you have today. But all along the way between where they are and where you are dimensions that try to diminish their ability to see and function in the world academically. Systems that are set up to deny their educational, intellectual curiosity, their social learning and understanding of the world, that is not going to be reinforced in the classroom, because it is steeped on a whole different kind of white supremacy-oriented education based on metrics and other scientific rigor that elucidates what is evidence-based, but it is all about who controls the narrative. It does not mean that a social learner isn't learning appropriately and being able to tell compelling stories about what they're learning, no matter who understands it or not. It's important for that social learner to learn along the way that there are different mediums to learn, that the foundation upon which they come to learn is so solidified, it gives them the level of confidence and their ability to see and navigate the world, because it's not been muted out and shunted away down a path that makes it highly challenging to be working so fast and so hard in the mind when it doesn't still itself long enough to feel confident and competent in the ways in which we learn. That's equity. That is equity. That is valuing the brain power on any one individual and their environment and many other factors that instill and enhance and sustain their potential to learn. Not an educational system that is predicated on trying to make sure everyone is learning the same way with different potential and different lived experiences. It's unfair, it's untenable, and it's unchallenged.
Wow, can I get an amen? Can I get an amen?
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Listen,
Amen.
we have one more question, but I want to say this before we lose any more people. For those of you like Brother Joel are in a situation where you can help to mentor someone else, use that. I'm not talking to just Blacks. I'm not talking to just people of color. I'm talking to everyone that you can mentor. Use that as a way that young people who would not normally get access to this profession can get into the profession. Let the schools know that you're available to take interns, so that these, or even people for observation, that these young people can get an opportunity to see what the profession is like and have a little more access. Dr. Gibbs, thank you. Last one, Kevin Gray, welcome, and your question next.
All right, how's everybody doing? My name is Kevin Gray. I'm a graduate of Tuskegee University, 2009. Currently, I'm working for Los Angeles Unified, been here for 10 years. And I also have my own brand of OT called Q Athletics. And with Q Athletics, it's outside of the box and I'm using sports. And the backstory on that is that I can remember vividly my homeboy that I grew up with senior year, that last ride from school. And we both, of course, grew up playing sports, and that which is pretty predominantly every Black boy's dream of making it professionally.
Yes,
and
indeed.
Of course, at that time, we didn't have, that D1 offer. And I remember my homeboy telling me and looking me in my eyes and saying he didn't know what he was going to do if he didn't go to school, if he couldn't get a scholarship to play basketball. Of course, I was fortunate enough to have my dad in my life. He didn't growing up. And of course, I know that plays a big role, having a positive male figure in your life as a young Black man. Fast forward, I, of course, went to Tuskegee. He's just now, we reconnected. He's just now getting off basically federal papers for drug trafficking, drug charges. And he's trying to he is turning his life around. I'm not gonna say trying. He's making the steps, but I'm currently using the sports as a way of connecting OT in the Black community. But I've been doing these free workshops here in South Central at different coffee shops, and it's free. It's a free like OT wellness handwriting workshop. But I haven't had that that show up of young Black boys and girls and families that I would like to have. So I know the word therapy has been a strong disliked word in our community as Black people, and we don't really look at that word as something beneficial. We kind of shy away from it. So my question to you, Dr. Gibbs, is in what ways can we destigmatize that word and let people in our community know exactly what OT is there for, and in all the different areas, because we can help out our community in so many areas, in so many ways. Like what are those strategies that you could share as far as how to connect OT or occupational therapy with the Black community?
Well, Kevin, I don't know of a better representation of what one should say than what I just heard you say. It's exactly what you're doing, thinking outside of the box, bringing your creativity, bringing your passion, and bringing a level of conviction of knowing why you must do it differently. That you acquired a degree, are licensed in the profession, and are doing beyond what the profession taught you how to do. That, for me, is making sure that you own the way in which you want to do this profession, and the profession doesn't own you. It's important to bring that kind of spirit and creativity to engage in those who are curious and you are savvy with technology and innovative with the ways in which you connect with people of all different passion and imaginations and vision for themselves through athletics. They have aspirations to succeed, and then they meet you. It's not necessarily therapy that's going to turn them on or off. It's you. It's the way in which you treat them that causes them to feel aligned because you chose to see them and value them in ways that it felt really different. And so I just want to encourage you to continue to be that critical thinker, that occupational therapist, intervening and inspiring people from their heart to their brains, to the actions in their limbs, that not only through sports, but the ability to be cognitively dominant just as well as they can be physically dominant. That's what they see in you. Spread that message.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to say one more thing quick to Kevin. I saw a group of your former classmates in Tennessee about when we were in Tennessee a few years back. And it gave me hope that that's the most I've ever seen people of color in one class. And it gave me hope. So I want to say, whatever that school is doing, keep it up. But also, if you can bring your idea to remote media, we can actually share. We're 3 hours away. Well, not 3 hours away. We're 3 hours apart. So we can't really help much in person. But if you have a remote session, feel free to post it in our group, and we will help to publicize it, because we help you help them. That's what we can do. Brother Delvin, all yours.
So I would just be remiss if I don't recognize two people on this call. One is Dr. Penny Collier, who introduced me to the name Dr. Brian Gibbs when he was at Johns Hopkins 10 years ago when I met him for the first time, just for a few minutes. And also, I would love to hear from your professor, Dr. Ben Atchison, for a few minutes, and then we'll close out. So, Dr. Collier, you want to say a few words?
Hi, Penny.
Hey, Brian. I've been following this man all over the country. Last time I met him was in person in Oregon, and I'm still on the West Coast. You're profound, and one of the things that I was thinking, because both Brian and I, and actually Delvin, dip into public health and have spent quite a number of our professional life going to the Public Health Association meetings. And I think I'd like to encourage the brothers in particular to try to get to some of those meetings. It really expands your horizons. It really allows you to network with others who have a much broader perspective on some of the issues that we're facing. And in a lot of ways allows people to mentor you again. Brian, I did have a question for you, because your book list, and I hope they put up the book list again, is pretty heavy reading. I've read quite a few of them. Basic question, here's a softball question. What's your favorite? And the other ones are, what are those that were not showing up? So for example, I've read Isabel Wilkerson's Caste and had a discussion with my book group about caste. I've gone back and read some of the old Ann Petrie books, Miss Mildred's Community and things like that. For the professors out there, one of the things that's really problematic to me is that the professors don't know how to read this line of literature and weave it into their lectures in a meaningful way, because in many cases it riles up a lot of feelings, some anger, some frustration, some white privilege issues that they don't want to face. I'm just throwing it out to you, Brian. Of those books, what do you like?
An American Health Dilemma by Drs. Michael Bird and Linda Clayton, a volume book set.
Yeah, got those.
Chronicalizes the Africans' experience in America and correlates it with health. Really does a deep dissection of the historical accounting of where medicine was created and who it was created for, and where the size of a brain and the ways in which we can say the chain of being, marginalizes Black people. And this is the predicate for teaching, this is the predicate for the ways in which our white faculty who are not introduced early find resistance to and are not willing to be enlightened to seeing the world differently. Unless there's some level of accountability that is spoken through the mission and evaluation of their performance or student reviews, all different ways in which it can be built in to incentivize or hold that faculty member accountable to being more culturally literate.
And good job, brothers.
Dr. Ben Atchison, you want to say a few words?
Well, you know, what can I say, Dr. Gibbs, Brian? You know, I love you dearly.
Yes,
Marcia's
indeed.
here with me, and you know, she had an opportunity to meet you years ago, and you and I have obviously been connected for a long, long time. And
yes,
what can I say? But I'm just so grateful to have had you in my life. And you know, I think you touch on something that it's so true for me as a white male with significant privileges, talking about trying to be culturally informed and culturally aware. It really is about cultural humility, to really step back and say, you know, you don't know anything, to myself. And at least then the next step is to have that, you know, willingness, as you said, to admit that and then continue to try to learn. And every day I tell myself what I have learned, but what I still need to learn and to act on. There's so much that troubles me throughout my career. I've seen things from somewhat of an enthusiastic acceptance of the need to be, you know, to embrace diversity and equity inclusion, to indifference. And now I see more resistance as a society. And I think that does impact in the university and right into the classroom. One of the better experiences I can describe is insisting that we have a statement in our application that went beyond GPA, but went into a student's description of expressing their knowledge, their awareness of DEI, but also things that were manifested, things that they have done, a student has done, to really engage and participate in something that taught them about inclusion. But even that small aspect of an application to try to make that holistic was met with some indifference, if not outright resistance. So you know, it troubles me, and I think for me is just to continue to educate others, especially when I was on the faculty and the chair, educating students who would say, why do you need a statement on this? I don't understand why this is important. That was the kind of thing that said to me, we have so much work to do. But I know we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to shout out to Penny Collar, because she's the one who messaged me. Thank goodness she's a friend of mine on Facebook, about you delivering a presentation. And so I frantically tried to figure out where you were going to be doing that. And you just happened to send that to me the other night about you were going to be doing this presentation. And, you know, you give me so much credit, so far too much credit. You know, the day I met you as a young man back in 1979, I think it was, and to this moment tonight, I like to listen to you. Anytime I'm with you, Brian, and Marcia will attest to this, I like to listen to what you have to say, because you teach me so much. And, you know, your regard and your love for me and for everybody else that you know in your life is just something I don't experience a lot with other people in my life. So I better stop there, because I could continue to go on, and I certainly hope that
And the tears are flowing.
get to see you in person again. Thank you so much for honoring me by allowing me to, by inviting me and letting me sit in on this. And this organization, brothers, you're wonderful. I'm so pleased to be part of this. Thank you.
Well, Ben, I will be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that I've been in your home, and Marcia is just awesome. And thank you for being a part of our wedding experience and being a protege, being, a figure in my life that made it safe to be more and better than the program I graduated from. And to know that you will always have my back. You will always believe in me. And in those moments when I, as an individual, stretch and stumble, that you will always be standing by to encourage me to keep going. And that's the person that you've been throughout my career. So I can't help but to acknowledge that you are a product of the brothers. Because as I am, you are, and we are. So thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, man, I'm choking up over here.
Yeah, I just met Ben and felt like I know him as well. Hey, but okay, we're gonna wrap up now, and I'm asking. This is totally voluntary. For those who feel so inclined, you can please turn on your camera and take a group picture. Since it's a lot of us, it might be a 2-part picture. If not, you don't worry about it. We usually share these to promote the next event, but we really appreciate you showing up. So the only instruction is show up and smile on the count of 3. All right, let me turn off these first. Okay. Remove spotlight, remove spotlight, and remove spotlight. Okay. Let's see. Yep. Looks beautiful. Roger, Mata, come on, turn on your light. Cancer, Roger's in darkness there. All right. On 3, just let me know. You ready? Okay. 1, 2,